The corona-induced economic crisis prevails across the world. No nation, including the most developed countries like United States, are not in a position to prevent this decline in the growth rates. Well, this is normally the justification of the government when anyone talks about a massive 24% drop in the country's gross domestic product in the Q1 of 2020 financial year. So Q1 essentially mean April to June 2022 constitutes the Q1 of this financial year. Well, it is true that the global economy is sluggish, is registering a negative growth rates. So, but the point is, as per the International Monetary Fund quarter on quarter global tracker, India is the worst affected among the G20 economies. But India ranks at a very low in terms of public expenditure to boost the economic growth. I'll just give you an example to understand this particular point. Let me compare India with Brazil. Well, why I am comparing India with Brazil is that Brazil is almost a similar at a similar stage of economic development. Both the countries are emerging economies and both are part of G20, both are part of BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa alliance. So a comparable level of economy, India has a comparable level of economy with Brazil. So the contraction in the Brazilian economy is around 9.7%. So Brazil's GDP fell by 9.7% in this quarter, April-June 2020. On the contrary, as per the IMF estimates, India's GDP fell by 25.6%. Well, as per India's Central Statistical Organization estimates, it is 23.9, but as per the IMF tracker, it is 25.6. So the Brazil has also seen the worst kind of corona situation. In fact, quite surprisingly, India is also at a comparable level in the pandemic impact also. India is the second most affected country in terms of the number of cases. Brazil is the third country. We recently surpassed Brazil to become the second most affected nation. So in terms of the pandemic impact, India and Brazil are comparable. In terms of the levels of economy, India and Brazil are comparable. But Indian GDP shrunk by over 24%, whereas the Brazilian GDP has fallen by only 9.7%. The reason is precisely the strict lockdown which India has imposed. So India's, as per the Oxford University Stringency Index, India has one of the most severe lockdowns in the world itself. So fine, but well, that we cannot prevent, so we need to control the pandemic. But what did we spend and what did Brazil spend? India has, and the government of India claimed that it has infused 10% of GDP as economic package, but it is essentially an economic package. It is not a fiscal package. The fundamental difference between economic package and fiscal package is that in an economic package, government actually initiates a set of policies rather than a cash outgo. In a fiscal package, it is essentially the cash outgo. Well, it is true that the government of India has announced a 21 lakh crore package, but hardly 2%, even less than 2%, some people estimate it to be 1 to 2%, but by any standards, less than 2% constitute the cash outgo. The remaining thing is actually the front loading of schemes or ensuring refunds, reducing the TDS, TCS, etc. and large part of it is the credit component. In fact, the credit component of the relief package which India has announced is also similar to the Brazilian credit package. There is no difference in that too. But the Brazil instead has given a package of 7.5% GDP. So Brazil has 9.7% GDP decline, but has given a package worth 7.5% of its GDP. India has a 24% decline, but has given less than 2% of GDP as a package. So obviously, when Brazil can do, why can't India? It is a simple question. Well, government of India and its supporters argue Well, due to this sharp decline in the gross domestic product, Government of India's tax revenues have substantially come down. So how can government spend? Well, people confuse between government and a household. When a household loses income, it can't spend because its ability to borrow is very, very limited. So beyond a point, it can't borrow and it will not even get a loan also. On the contrary, the government of India can't be stingy, can't be parsimonious, can't be withholding from spending. The simple reason for that is India in economy is in a vicious circle. There is no demand. When there is no demand, when there is a wage cut, when there is a wage cut and job cut, obviously the incomes will fall. When incomes fall, the demand for goods and services decline. When the demand for goods and services decline, production will come down. When production comes down, employment comes down. When employment comes down, incomes come down. When incomes come down, obviously the demand will come down. So this is called the vicious circle. So this has to be changed into a virtuous cycle where there are jobs, jobs will create incomes, incomes will create demand, demand will create more jobs. So this is called the virtuous cycle. Who should do this? Obviously industry will not do it because industry is hard pressed, there is no demand for its goods and services. So government has to inject a lot of liquidity into the economy. How can it inject liquidity into the economy? Well, it can impose taxes on the super rich. So in India can still impose a lot of taxes on the rich. The world's richest people, including the Walt Disney owner, have given a call for all the governments to impose taxes on them. So the rich can be still squeezed to benefit the poor in this country. So India's GDP declined by around 24%, but Jio's revenue increased by 183% during the same period. During the same period, Adanis have taken control of several airports in India. So now that everybody is poor in this pandemic, there are some people who are very rich. So obviously you tax the rich. It's called the Robin Hood tax. The second way is to borrow. The government of India can borrow from several sources. The ability to borrow is much more superior compared to even states also. Then government can even borrow from the Reserve Bank of India at a very low interest rate. It's called the quantitative easing. The RBI prints money and gives it to the government on credit. So this is what the United States is doing. This is what the European economies are doing. But the government of India refuses to do this because it says it will increase the inflation. Well, at this point of time when the demand is very low, even if you inject more liquidity into the economy, if you print more cash and spend it in the economy, I don't think there will be any serious rise in inflation. Yet another fear is the rating agencies will react adversely. So foreign capital flows will not come down. Doesn't matter. India has a very comfortable foreign exchange reserves of over $540 billion. So obviously this is not the time for the governments to think. This is the time for the governments to spend.